is the moment we waited for. Everything you want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot on my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same thing. Stayed down, never switched up. Only thing changed was the game. I'm in the zone now. Nothing can change what we on now. When I pull up, know it's going down. Foot on the gas, ain't no slowing down. Aiming for greatness, no settling. Kick down the doors, they won't let me in. Taking no else, yeah, I gotta win. Watch me kick down the doors, they won't let me in. Who running the game now? Foot on the gas, can slow down. No, my team, we holding it down. We know we running it now. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. Watch the game change, yeah. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. Watch the game change. I do not gamble, but bet on me. Tell them that's life, yeah, it's still la vie. I'm taking a shot for my enemies. I can't waste no more time on my energy. I know they know I got it on lock. Go against me, that's a long shot. Cause I'm counting wins all around the clock. Never doubt me, boy, I don't stop. Who do you feel when they make you the monster? I am not scared of none of you imposters. Taking the lead now while they watching. Think you should leave now while the option. Taking no else, yeah, I gotta win. Watch me kick down the doors, they won't let me in. Who running the game now? Foot on the gas, can slow down, no.
Welcome to another edition of the It's Cavalier podcast. It's your boy Mack, and today I am joined by one of the best sources in that of Cav coverage, and that is RealCavsFans. How you doing, man?
Doing good. I appreciate it.
There's just been not enough to truly talk about this offseason. I mean, we were just talking about it before we went live here, but at the end of the day, the Cavaliers have given us a few things to discuss, and so with this offseason period, if you were to ask most Cavs fans, especially on social media, on various outlets, I think many of them would tell you that they are unsatisfied with the direction that this team has kind of gone in this offseason because we just haven't gotten enough to talk about as we see some of these other teams making moves. And admittedly, there hasn't been a ton of movement. The team has basically cleaned house at the coaching level and brought in an entirely new coaching staff. Headlined by Kenny Atkinson. There are some other big names on that staff, including Johnny Bryant, Jordan Odd, and DeMar Carroll. And that, to me, is worth getting a fair bit excited about, considering the stark contrast in coaching styles between J.B. Bickerstaff, who is now in Detroit, and Atkinson. And we're going to dive into all of that a little bit later. But most of the offseason has centered around the Cavs making moves to retain talent, whether that be the 3-year extension for Donovan, the rookie scale extension for Evan, or adding additional years to Jarrett Allen's deal, and to a lesser extent, keeping Emoni Bates and Tristan Thompson, I guess. You could slap the label of retained on because he did suit up for Cleveland last year. But outside of those things getting accomplished, the team has made just few moves on the margin. So before I get into my questions, I just have to ask, what is your just personally, what is your level of excitement? There's probably a better way for me to word this, but how are you feeling overall about the offseason so far for the Cavaliers?
I understand it to an extent, but they're really operating with a small margin for error. And kind of what I mean by that is, to your point, they've doubled down on retaining talent, cleaning house with the coaching staff, really saying last year was health related, last year was coaching related. And I understand that, with the market, with where Garland was at, where Allen was at trade wise, you don't want to let past coaching decisions impact what your future talent will be. We always talked about viewing the offense through JB Bickerstaff's eyes. Do you also want to view the talent through JB Bickerstaff's eyes and make a decision based off of that? So I can understand wanting to be patient with some of the core talent. But if you're going to retain the core talent and try to elevate the core talent, part of that is also looking at what you're doing to support the core talent. Now, coaching, health, we talked about obviously is part of that, but also how you're building around the core. And personally, I think we can make some decisions about what that looks like and what is needed to elevate the core, and it may not be what's on the roster currently. And that's where the disconnect is a little bit, and not doing enough to continually elevate the core. But also there are decisions that they have to make that don't allow a lot of patience. So you have LeVert being expiring next year. You have Okoro's contract this year. You have, once these rookie extensions kick in, which they already have, this is going to be an expensive team, and it's going to be hard to make moves based off of that. So really what it seems like is they're wanting to take the first half of the year to make an evaluation on the talent surrounding the core, but also with the core, and say, hey, is this good enough? And then hopefully make moves at the deadline. Problem with that is it's just such a small margin for error that not every team is going to make moves at the deadline like the Mavericks did and say, we're going to get to the finals. It's always hard to make a move of that size and think we're going to get acclimated that quickly. So that's just kind of the rub, is that, yes, you want to be careful about what decisions you can make, but also feel like there are some decisions you can make, and they're kind of waiting maybe until the last minute to do that. So it's a very risky proposition, but we'll see. Kobe's paid the big bucks to hopefully be right about that.
I mean, at this point, he's kind of living by, the core, right? He's standing by the idea and belief, at least in my estimation, that injury and, health per se, I guess, in coaching were the biggest factors in this Cavaliers team ending the season the way that it ended. And you can make a case for that, I suppose, but there are still clear holes on this roster that we all see. And I'm sure Kobe Altman sees as well. But to your point, I mean, you look at the value or the perceived value of Darius Garland coming off a pretty injury-riddled season and a down year by his standards. And even when you look at him from a statistical standpoint, his worst year was still pretty decent. And then Jarrett Allen, right? A name that you can consistently hear appear in trade rumors, hearing a lot that teams have some sort of interest in him, but was it enough for the Cavaliers to feel like it was worth pulling the trigger? And these are things that we don't know, obviously, and we speculate on, but Kobe Altman is kind of, digging his foot in the ground and saying, hey, I still believe in this core, or at the very least, he believes that there were no moves that truly made this team better by sacrificing one of those core four members. The pieces surrounding that core four, you also touched on, that is where I feel like we have the most trouble with trying to elevate ourselves, right? For years, we have wanted to bring in a traditional 3-and-D wing, but so much of what I see on social media and just in Cavs forums and people talking Cavaliers discourse in general, people seem to think that these types of player archetypes grow on trees, man. It is just, it's frustrating to see some of these things that are being said about the current roster that we have. But I understand why people feel like, hey, this is the next big piece that we need to acquire. In your opinion, what is the biggest piece that the Cavaliers are missing? Because we know that they kind of need some depth in that front court, and we know that we need some we do need some taller, or should I say, guys who fit the traditional mold of that three.
So I'd say it's two things. One, it's probably a third big that they've been searching for since Love departed, but also, like you mentioned, that 3-and-D wing. And it doesn't even have to be a highly skilled, highly capable. It just has to be someone who can defend their position and be consistent spacing enough to stay on the floor in the playoffs. So we're not talking about a high threshold player, just someone who can do those things. So I think those are the two biggest weaknesses that they have right now. And I'd almost lean towards a third big as being a bigger weakness, just because they have a lot of different options they can throw at the wing position. And ultimately, when you get down in the playoffs, Strus, Garland, Mitchell, even LeVert, those guys are going to take a bulkier minutes. So you can kind of cobble together enough minutes to be successful. But when it comes to the bigs, yes, Mobley and Allen are going to play all or most of your minutes there, but still that third big is critical to fitting those pieces together, especially Allen and Mobley. We saw how good Love was because of how fluid he was on both ends, how well he could fit with both. When you go to Wade or Niang, you're almost giving up something, whether it be rebounding, defense, size, that makes that fit a little bit more tenable and makes that much more pressure on Mobley or Allen to really elevate everyone around them. So that third big seems like a little bit bigger of a hole, because even Wade can slide down in three, and he can fill that wing position just by nature of how you structure the roster. So those are two positions that really worry me, but also third big, just because they really don't have anyone else who can do it, where the wing you can kind of cobble together just based off what they have currently.
Prior to the team going out and re-signing Tristan Thompson, bringing him back again, was there a player that you had your eye on that was reasonably priced, that fit what the Cavaliers needed?
So that reasonably priced part is the difficult part there. Because like we mentioned, this team's going to get more expensive. So it's not only looking at, are they affordable today, but what does that mean moving forward for the salary and for these extensions? So just like you have in football with the rookie QB and a rookie contract, that is your time to strike, because once that QB gets expensive, you're having to take away other parts of the roster to afford that quarterback. Same thing with this core. Once these extensions started to kick in, which they already have with Garland, but it's going to get even more expensive with Mobley, you're really having to be careful about who you pay because of what that means for your core. We saw this with Boston. I mean, Boston really can't pay too much more outside of their 4 or 5 guys because of how expensive it gets. So when you talk about making any moves this year, it's not only what it means this year, but what it means moving forward as well. So they could afford a guy this year, but we've heard the narrative of them trying to be careful of going into luxury tax because of their repeater tax, and they know how expensive it's going to be in years moving forward. If you pay another guy this year as well, you're also having to not sign LeVert next year. You're having to probably move on from Strus and or Okoro next year. So it's really about who fits, but also who fits the salary timeline with where they're at. So, you know, I think that's part of why they've been so conservative and who they've been pursuing, because they realize the salary implications of what's going to go in future years and where they're going and what they may have to give up to live with someone this year.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. And in terms, for me, it's why it kind of seems like they've targeted some of these on the margins guys, some of this young talent that they could potentially develop into roles that will be on cost-controlled, cost-effective team control for a couple of years at the least. It's what I think about when we think about the recently signed Luke Travers, who I'm ecstatic is finally over here with the Cavaliers after spending the past couple of seasons with the Perth Wildcats and Melbourne United. And the Cavaliers do also have 15 games worth of Summer League game tape over the past couple of seasons to parcel through for him. JT Thor being brought in, I thought that was kind of an underrated two-way signing. I like his latent ability as a shooter and his length out there. The only move that I just don't consider like an on-the-margin move per se was the drafting of Jalen Tyson, somebody who I feel like could end up being a day-one contributor and honestly who I've fallen in love with for his abilities as a playmaker and play finisher, and having more creators is never a bad thing out there. All of that said, there's still, and you already mentioned this name, there's still one pretty major domino to fall for this team, and that is Isaac Okoro. And based off that recent stretch provision that was used on Ricky Rubio's contract, how confident are you that we actually get a resolution to this ordeal soon? Because I'm just pulling my hair out with you, man.
So I think there's probably a disconnect between what Okoro and the reps want and what the Cavs want, especially like we talked about when it comes to their overall financial future. So the biggest impediment right now is Okoro's $11 million qualifying offer. That's probably higher than anything he'd likely get on the open market, and is probably what is stopping Okoro and his reps from signing anything long term. Because based off where the Cavs are at, they can probably afford about an $8.5 million first year salary to stay under the luxury tax for this year, which puts them probably about a $9 or $9.5 million annual average value on the contract. So is Okoro willing to take less than what he's going to make in year one to secure a longer financial future coming off a down year? Or is he going to want something closer to where he's at on the qualifying offer to forego that and say, hey, yeah, if it's closer to 10 or 11, it makes sense for me to take it and not take a bet of myself this year. So that's kind of the risk proposition where the Cavs are probably coming a little bit lower with where the market's at, saying this is what we can fit. You know, we don't feel confident based off your shooting performances the last couple of playoffs, but long-term, this makes sense. And Okoro's reps are probably saying, hey, we're a young, we're still just coming off our first contract, still a young player, still a lot to prove. He's improved every year during a regular season. We've seen what like Matisse Thybulle got a couple years ago with $11 million per year. We feel confident that it should be closer to that. So I think that's kind of the rub. The Cavs are offering lower based off their financial future, and the Okoro's reps are probably wanting a little bit more to secure the long-term future and may ultimately lead towards a qualifying offer and betting on himself. The problem with that is the risky proposition. We've seen the market kind of speak to what a guy of Okoro's ability is if he can't shoot be worth, which is about at $7-8 million range, which is, Josh Okogie this year. Guys in that range who really haven't solidified their ability to shoot. However, if he can figure it out, then you're looking at more 11, 12, D'Anthony Melton, Josh Hart, guys of that nature. So that's kind of where the market's dictating, and it's a big risk think. Are you going to bet on yourself and forego that financial security, or take the qualifying offer?
It's just difficult, man. Like the fan in me wants to keep rooting for Isaac because I do feel like we've seen like a steady incline in development for his game, but he just failed to put it all together at the right time. It sucks because he's coming off a regular season in which he just put up 9.4 points and shot a career best 39.1% on 3-point distance. However, those wheels fell off on the offensive end at the in the playoffs where those numbers dropped down to 5.5 points and 25.7% respectively, and it's all low volume. And so there's always going to be this constant argument. Well, just how much of that increase in shooting percentage during the regular season was because he's still not taking a ton of shots. It's roughly around 3 attempts per game. And I think a lot of that, there is some validity in that, but I also do believe that he has managed to improve. It's just been poor timing for him because for everything that this man gives us from a perimeter defense standpoint out there, being an elite point of attack defender, there's only so much value, as you stated, in having that type of player archetype playing a solid amount of playoff minutes. So I guess my first question for you would be, do you actually buy into the idea that he has improved in that regard? And do you think that it would be worth taking that chance from a monetary standpoint to go above and beyond to keep him in town for the next couple of years?
Like you mentioned, timing is everything. So if this were the Cavs of 2 years ago, going an extra level to pay Okoro $11 million a year probably is palatable. They're not as worried about the salary cap restraints. They're probably wanting to continue continuity with their younger talent and try to see it through. But that's not where they're at now. They're at competing at a higher level. And we saw a move like this with the Thunder, where the Thunder traded a younger ascending player in Josh Giddey for a more ready now player in Alex Caruso.
Love that.
And it's an understood move because they're trying to align with them being able to compete now. They're giving up youth for their current timeline. So that's kind of where you're at with Okoro too, is can he be good enough to where you need him now, not 3 or 4 years down the road? The other thing is too, we talked about timing. The Cavs are not going to be able to keep Okoro, Strus, and LeVert. Financially just can't do it. So now you're having to have to start those discussions about which one, maybe 2 of those are going to be with this core long term. Or maybe it's someone else too. Maybe it's a Cam Johnson or DeAndre Hunter. Maybe those are the type of guys you're targeting, trying to consolidate all that and make that your salary slot. But when we look at salary compensation outside of the core, you really can only afford maybe 1 or 2 of these guys that are making from that 8, 12, 13, $14 million range. You really have to be careful about that. So when we talk about timing, that's really involved in this just as much as Okoro's development individually. Now, can he do it? Are you willing to make that bet with where they're at currently?
I think that's fair. Yeah, it's fair to suggest. And to me, that kind of aligns with my next question for you here. And that is, from like a personal standpoint, do you believe that he still holds upside, and is the Kenny Atkinson edition going to actually work wonders for him if he does end up re-signing?
So we've heard Kenny Atkinson be referenced as the guard whisperer. We saw it with Jeremy Lin. We saw it with Aaron Brooks back in the day in Houston. We saw it with Ty Jerome even in Golden State. We saw it with D'Angelo Russell, Spencer Dinwiddie in Brooklyn.
Karis LeVert even, yeah.
Is he going to have to whisper to Okoro, or is it going to have to be a loud yell to get him?
It's a megaphone yell.
So, I mean, there is – every year we do this where we see Okoro start the year and we see the progress, or we see the hope in him, because we see how staunch he is defensively, especially point of attack. We see some of the dribble drive stuff. And we see the shooting slowly improve, but when it comes to the postseason, it's just not there. So the upside is there because ultimately if he can develop that consistent shot and do it at a high enough volume, these types of players are so valuable in what every team is driving for, especially these playoff contention type teams. I mean, Lou Dort, Contavious Caldwell-Pope, these guys are making 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 million because of how valuable that skill set is. So if Okoro can do that, that's really what you're hoping for and holding on to, because his timeline, age aligns with the core. He probably is a very good product to have. He's reliable. He's consistent. He's pretty healthy for the most part. He's a very high character guy. So that's probably why they're hanging on to a little bit of hope for him. But ultimately, it comes down to, do you believe his timeline aligns with his developmental arc, aligns with where the Cavs are currently at? And that's where I tend to skew. If you can find someone who better aligns with the developmental arc, knowing the financial implications of where they're at, I'd lean to moving on from him in substitute of someone else.
And I think that right there is what I know I'm kind of struggling with, because I know that right now it feels as if this is a player who still has some potential that has yet to be unlocked. But will he actually be able to be allotted additional time to see it through? I just don't know. I just do not know. And it is tough now that the Cavaliers find themselves in this type of timeline, but we knew that this was going to be the case as soon as we traded for Donovan Mitchell, that the timelines for XYZ player were going to be expedited in terms of development. It's kind of the reason why we trying to rein ourselves back in and brought in a player who has primarily been known as who has a track record for player development when you're talking about the growth and development of both Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. But for a role player like Isaac Okoro, who is in a contract year situation, it just never seemed like he was probably going to be long for Cleveland. But that is not saying that he won't be back, but I'm starting to feel less and less likely that even if he does end up returning for the 2024-25 season, that he's going to be here for the years to come. But with that being the case, just kind of moving on there, the Cavaliers do have a lot of positional redundancy at this point, with some overlapping skill sets in both the backcourt and front court. Both guards are skills facilitators who are equally adept at scoring the basketball. And in the case of Donovan Mitchell, an extremely effective scorer. Both tend to operate best with the ball in their hands. And in the front court, you have two bigs who get the job done in a very similar fashion offensively by being rolling threats. Neither are reliable floor spacers to this point in their careers, but at least Evan Mobley has started to progress as a perimeter shooter. And he is coming off a regular season in which he completed a career best 37.3% from range. And that's great on the surface, but that volume at just 1.2 attempts per game isn't truly enough to consider him a stretch big, in my opinion. So just 18 attempts across 12 games this past postseason as well, making only 5. Progress for sure, but not yet reliable. And then Jarrett Allen, conversely, 19 of 111 from three-point distance, or rather 17.1% across his time in the league. Now, with all of that being the case, what do you believe needs to happen internally for the Cavaliers to overcome any redundancy and to get the best out of this current core? In other words, how do they maximize what they currently have?
So it's probably a couple different things. One, it's being able to be successful offensively with either Allen or Mobley being your fourth best shooter on the floor. And it's finding someone who consistently be that two-way wing player when you need them in the playoffs, because Strus was there. His shot was a little bit inconsistent, but it just was enough for him just to be there. So whether it be Dean Wade, Jalen Tyson, or Coral, someone else needs to be that connector piece between the guards and the bigs to do enough offensively to be a threat and provide spacing, but also do enough defensively to take on some of the wing talent that they're going to face in the playoffs. So it's probably a duel between those two items.
Yeah, I see the addition of Kenny Atkinson, and I'm hoping that he can spark something that we haven't seen yet from this Cavaliers team. To me, that is a motion-based offense, right? We kind of feel like JB for the longest time had the offense looking stagnant, and this is coming from an avid JB defender. But I look at things, and when I was analyzing the differences between the two, one of the things that really stood out to me, or should I say two of the things that stood out to me upon an examination of Kenny Atkinson's time in Brooklyn and a few other places in the league, was number one, the pace, right? Finished top 10 in pace in the 3 out of the 4 seasons at the helm, including a number 1 finish in his first season at the helm in Brooklyn in 2016-2017. And that season, that lone season outside of the top 10, was literally right outside at 11th. And so the full breakdown, 101.75, which is first in 2016-17, 99 in 2017-18, and 18-19, 101.52, which is that 11th place finish, and then 19-20 at 101.70, which is 10th. And then the other thing that immediately jumps right off the screen is the number of 3-point attempts in each of those seasons, which I know we've talked about ad nauseum since he's been hired, but it still amazes me because he's had a top 5 finish in 3-point attempts each and every season. And that kind of has felt like the antithesis of JB, who conversely has had a 28th finish, a 22nd finish, a 24th finish. And then lo and behold, last year he jumped all the way up to 8th. But at the end of the day, what is the biggest difference you think that we'll see between these two coaching styles during the 2024-25 season? What are you looking forward to most?
So when you kind of talked about, what's going to be different and what's going to make this work, I thought it was interesting during Atkinson's press conference, and they kind of talked about spacing with bigs. And they said, how are you going to make it work? And he said, well, we can push the pace. That's going to eliminate some of the spacing concerns. And you kind of talked about with pace right there. Atkinson is going to be wanting someone to push the pace, and having two bigs who can really run well and eliminate the need to set up, get set, and allow defenses to exacerbate spacing issues hopefully can help. That's one way he kind of talked about his time with Draymond and two non-shooting bigs in Golden State. And that was another thing that we've been, I don't want to group you in, but I think you're consistent in this, yelling for is more on-ball action with our bigs, utilizing them as a playmaker and utilizing your guards and wings around who can act as spacers. Because when you have Mitchell, Garland, Strus, don't waste them on the ball being a spacer. Use them off the ball to create that space. Mobley and Allen are such good passers individually that utilize them as a playmaker, and allowing flow and action to be created around them can only benefit the spacing and how you interact with the pieces. So definitely pace, hoping to push the pace more, seeing more action with the bigs are two things I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, you see a lot more motion in his offensive schemes, and that has always been the case with him. The sets that are run tend to maximize shooting on the move, off-screen actions, and a great deal of facilitation out of the post and elbows from those bigs, allowing them a lot of options. Even if the players, the guys moving around off these screens get jammed up, there's easily a lot of pivots you can point to and say, hey, you know what? Let's create this action, whether it be a DHO. From Evan to Max, or from Jarrett to Max. We saw those three in particular develop sort of a chemistry throughout the this past season, first with Evan and Max, and then when he got injured, we saw Max and Jarrett's chemistry kind of take off. And I'm really hoping that can be even more so during the 2024-25 season with players like Sam Merrill, who I felt like just did not get enough run. And honestly, I think dude is like the perfect Kenny Atkinson player. Maybe that's just me hyping him up a bit, but I feel like there is the pieces here. There's the precedent that can be set for Kenny Atkinson to really get the most out of this group, or at least more than we've seen during the JB Bickerstaff era.
Well, and I think going back to, what we saw previously was at times the offense got really, really stagnant and the ball stuck. And that just did not work well in the playoffs, but really relied upon, Darius or Donovan trying to do what they do best, which is be the best offensive player. But in the time with Atkinson was in Brooklyn, you look at dribbles per touch and seconds per touch. His last 3 years in Brooklyn, he was 6th, 6th, and 14th in dribbles per touch, and 3rd, 6th, and 11th in seconds per touch. So that ball was moving, the bodies were moving. You're not going to see a lot of things sticking offensively. They're going to try to be a more democratic offense. And that was actually one of the things in looking at Atkinson that maybe some players were not as happy with, that it was almost too democratic, where, it wasn't as star-based. But I think in this instance, that probably will work for the better, where it takes some burden off Donovan and Darius' shoulders to be the elite players and really spread the wealth around and provide more opportunity for Mobley to ascend, or more looks for other guys to contribute in other ways, and not just get bogged down in the playoff, pick and roll that we saw the last couple of years.
I think that's an excellent observation, because in order to kind of get around or circumvent the lack of shooting in the front court out of your starters, you kind of have to find creative ways to get the ball moving. If you increase that pace, if you move the ball around, let everybody touch it a little bit more, you get a little bit more electricity in that basketball, and maybe you take the defense off guard at certain points. Maybe Evan and Mobley and Jarrett Allen become even more of lob threats, because I feel like that kind of died off a little last year as teams we were predictable. We were very predictable at points where you could just double Darius or Donovan and force them to give the ball up. And we know that there just are not a lot of creators on this offense. And so we don't necessarily need Evan Mobley to turn into Nikola Jokic out there out in the elbows or the post, but we need to be able to feature him a little bit more to get him more comfortable with the ball in his hands. And I think you mentioned some of the things that Atkinson said at his introductory press conference. One of the things that I really took away and that really stood out to me was him alluding to the fact that he wanted to see Evan Mobley kind of take the ball up the court a little bit more and give him a little bit more ball handling duties. And I know watching him bring the ball up the court has been kind of hit and miss since he was drafted, because we have seen him kind of turn the ball over at certain points or dribble it off his foot or something. But I think if you're not specifically referring to the ability to shoot the ball, one of the areas that I want to see him really progress at this year is that ball handling, being able to put the ball on the floor and attack defenses head on. That is definitely one of the things that I'm looking forward to most.
Yeah, you must be watching the Mobley offseason runs, getting hyped about some of the ball handling we're seeing in those. But no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think what's great about pushing the pace and having Mobley push the ball more is we saw it in Brooklyn where Atkinson was really all for anyone who got the rebound to go. You know, we saw Ronda Jefferson be one of those guys in Brooklyn where he really took advantage of some of that better ball handling for a guy his size and take advantage of it. And same thing goes for Mobley, where, you know, I don't think it's going to be as limiting where big gets the ball, big goes to the guard. It's going to be go, get up the floor, get a good look, you know, push the pace. So I think that's what I'm most excited about. And to your point with Mobley, one of the other ways that he can provide spacing is being able to beat his man off the dribble. So it's not only, you know, elevating and shooting over guys, but if he can beat a guy off the dribble, that causes defense to sink and that causes additional spacing for other guys to kick out from that. So being able to play face up not only means shooting it, but also being able to be a threat off the dribble. So what I've kind of rallied on Mobley the most is what is his spot? And that's really hoping for Atkinson to explore it with Mobley is what is your go-to move? What is your go-to spot? You know, it doesn't have to be anything ridiculous, but he has to have a spot on the floor or move on the floor to kind of build his offensive regimen around. I mean, does he really have that now?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, one of the biggest criticisms that I often see towards Mobley is that he does not have a move, or that he does not have a go-to or something that he can rely upon. Do you think that is the case right now?
I think so, and I don't say that in a negative way towards Mobley where it's taking away from his development. It's just if he wants to reach the next step, that's what has to happen. It has to be a spot on the floor where he knows the block, the elbow, whatever it may be, he can go to, and that's where his offense he's most comfortable that he can build off of. When we see all the great players, whether it be Kobe with the elbow or DeMar in the mid-range or, you know, KG with his mid-range jumper, Bosch with his mid-range jumper, they all have that one kind of spot that they know they can get to, that they can be successful. And then from there, they can kind of build off and go into other areas that can build off of what their move is. So I think that's the one thing with Mobley. You know, we know he's a lob threat. We know he can get up and down in transition, but what's that next step in the half court or what he can really build his offensive game around is what I'm hoping Atkinson can help open up.
Personally, I think it's the mid-range game, but I guess we're going to kind of have to stay tuned on that. I think that everybody is going to see a jump across the board in terms of overall attempts due to the sheer pace probably going to be increased, but I don't know if Mobley's going to be afforded enough 3-point opportunities for me to truly feel like that's his go-to. So I'm going to right now, I'll just put a pin in it and say I think it'll end up being that mid-range game, but time will tell. Outside of some of the bigger names on this roster, is there one guy off this Cavaliers bench that you feel like just still has an area that needs to be tapped into that we just have not utilized enough?
So I'd probably say two guys. One, are we going to see Point LeVert this year?
It's like Point and Jetty with me at times with LeVert being at the point, and I know that just having the positional versatility that LeVert has is good in a sense, but I don't know how much of that I want to see.
Fair enough, and I probably reside in the same camp, but I think when you start to look at roster construction, how do you get your best players on the floor? How do you utilize what you have? It almost necessitates it for LeVert to be kind of your backup point, whether it's running with Garland or Mitchell. But in order for him to slide over to the point, that allows opportunities for, you know, whether it be Merrill, Tyson, Wade, whomever to be Okoro to be your wing. If not, then you're really committing to, is it a smaller backcourt like Merrill and Mitchell, or Merrill and Garland, or CPJ and Mitchell? So I guess it depends on what kind of look you want. But seeing how much success LeVert had with the ball in his hands with Atkinson, that's kind of why I mentioned that. Is I don't know if he's going to try to turn to that, kind of going back to what worked so well, hoping to slide him over more to the point. But it's always been an adventure. The problem with LeVert is, sometimes with a run-on sentence, he gets started and doesn't know where it's going to end. So it's kind of condensing that, making it a more defined look and a defined approach. But I'd say that's kind of one skill set I'd really like to see Atkinson tap into. And clip this and send it to me back halfway through the season. We see LeVert stretch where trying to figure out what he's doing. But I think the other one, too, is just really trying to expand Wade's game more. That third big is really going to be relied upon how well Niang and Wade can produce. Because there's really no one else who can do what they can do on the roster at the 4 spot, whether they want to admit it or not. So seeing if he can get him consistently playing, which part of it is health, not much Atkinson can do there, but really gaining that confidence and really allowing him to do what he does best, which is just make others around him better by simply being on the floor. I think that's going to be the other huge part for what Atkinson can do moving forward.
I think that's fair. And one last point on LeVert. For me, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm taking summer league into account a little bit too much here. But there is a part of me that does want to see if Jalen Tyson can carry over that on-ball responsibility that he had at Cal over into and at the NBA level. And I know it was kind of hit and miss in particular games with Cleveland's summer league team, but there was enough there to suggest to me that he is comfortable at the NBA level handling the ball. But I do understand that part of getting the most and being able to just flat out get some of your best players out on the court is slotting guys in at certain positions and saying, here is your role. And LeVert is one of those guys where you can legitimately play him anywhere 1 through 3, and even some small ball 4 in certain lineups, which don't want to see too often, but it is possible with him. I think that Tyson is very much in the same camp that you can line him up anywhere 1 through 3. And I think that kind of leaves players like Craig Porter Jr., who I wish we could see more of, but he suffers from the reality of being kind of a short guy out there and playing in a backcourt on a team that has a star caliber backcourt. So finding minutes for the guard position in particular is going to be tough this year, because we can assume that both Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell are going to spend time at various points operating as the lead guard while one is on the bench. And so I do understand your point about LeVert. The player that I was going to mention was Wade. So I think you're spot on in regards to that one. But I think a lot of that too, man, is literally just Wade staying healthy. Because if we entered the playoffs with Dean Wade healthy, I feel like maybe we don't go 7 games with Orlando, but maybe that's just me being an eternal optimist. In terms of this roster in general, though, we clearly still have some holes. And I don't think they're necessarily going to be filled at this point in time. I think Isaac will be brought back, at least for the start of the season. But I guess my question to you as we get ready to close out here is, do you think the roster that we see now is going to be the same roster that enters the playoffs?
No. If it is, it's for one of 2 reasons. One, this roster is doing so well. They're hitting on all cylinders. There's no reason to break it up. Or Kobe is really content for better, for worse, for what they have. But I really find it hard to believe. I mean, LeVert's contract was always signed to be traded.
Right.
If you hang on to him, you're losing him probably for nothing at the end of the road. I mean, that's just where they're at. I mean, I think the Tyson draft pick, even though I know CBS Sports said afterwards they had an Isaac Okoro comparison, which
I cannot believe that.
I don't know who's drafting those, but I think that was more so a looking forward and replacing LeVert's role, given his kind of on-ball skills, seeing if he can duplicate some of that off the bench, knowing that LeVert, you're not probably going to be able to sign him or retain him, so therefore trying to find a skill set that brings some of the things that he has moving forward. So they have to make some decisions, and I think one of the criticisms of Kobe's tenure has been he's a little bit he's hung on to players a little bit too long instead of trading them at their highest value,
Yeah.
whether it be Love or Drummond or whoever else from the past. It's been hanging on to those guys, trying to milk every single thing out of him he can instead of trying to trade when the market's high. So that's kind of my one concern. And thinking if a move doesn't come, it could be that, and it could just be they really don't want to take the financial hit this year, knowing what that could mean for future years. Because we did a breakdown, we have actually pinned to the Twitter page, but when you take a look at what acquiring a DeAndre Hunter, what acquiring a Cam Johnson means, it means sacrificing elsewhere and going deep into the tax. I mean, with the core four that they have, if you plan to retain them, adding any kind of large salary like that basically makes it really, really hard to build out what else you can do. And I understand Dan Gilbert's got deep pocketbooks. It's ultimately a matter of him paying, but the longer you're into tax, the more restrictive it is. And we've seen Steve Ballmer is probably the richest owner that we've ever seen balk at paying Paul George because of what that meant to the salary cap and what it meant to building out a team. So even to that extent, there's a limit. So if we don't see Kobe make a move, it's probably with that in mind when it comes to the financial future moving forward.
I think that's totally fair. And in LeVert's case in particular, I don't know why, but I constantly see you kind of try and talk people off a ledge in regards to whether or not LeVert is going to be staying put in Cleveland or not, or if he'll take a hometown discount and sign for cheap to stay here in Cleveland. Is there any possibility in your eyes that LeVert ends up signing on a cheap contract to following the 2024-25 campaign, or do you just think this is completely written in stone that LeVert's final season in Cleveland will be this year?
So I'd say a few things to that. One, I could see him possibly taking a discount, knowing that he's really bounced around a lot in his career. And if he does find a home here with the core, with Atkinson, with Jarrett Allen, maybe saying, hey, I'm from the Ohio area. I've done a lot. I've seen a lot. This is where I feel comfortable. I'm willing to reduce my price to stay here. But from the Cavs perspective, do you really want to invest in a skill set with that injury history going into his 30s?
I think no, specifically because of Jalen Tyson. I think if you don't have a Jalen Tyson on the roster, maybe it's a little bit more of an open-ended conversation. But with Tyson, and they're not exactly the same player, obviously,
right,
but they essentially could fill the same type of role. And I think Tyson, being as young as he is, having as much upside as he has as a creator, and possibly being a two-way player on both ends of the floor, right? I think that you probably look at the contract that he is on, being under team control, and just saying, hey, let's see what this kid has. Let's see if he can fill the role and maybe get something out of LeVert's contract at the deadline. Maybe addressing the backup big situation. I don't know. There's a lot of different directions they can go in. But if I was a betting man, I'll just say this. If I was a betting man, I would bet this was LeVert's final year in Cleveland. And that's nothing against him.
No, I look, appreciate LeVert, appreciate all he's done. We've rode the LeVert ride. I'm happy to cash my ticket and go to the next ride. When we talk, and it's also realistic when we talk about what assets do the Cavs have to trade. Mm-hmm. LeVert and his contract are probably one of the better assets they have, for better or for worse. So if you want to improve outside the core four, that's probably the one that's going to be going out in a trade. So even from that perspective, personally, I don't think the supporting cast fits or elevates the core to its maximum. So when we start looking at that, it's how can we do that? And it's probably involving LeVert in a salary in addition to attaching it to an Okoro or someone else to reach that level of a player who has a salary that you're looking at that can bring in that fit. Is it a Cam Johnson? Is it a DeAndre Hunter? So even looking at the possibilities that are out there that may fit and may be a good value add, it's probably going to have to involve his contract. But like we talked about, you can't afford all of them. You can't pay all of them. And Tyson seems like a cost-effective version of LeVert, while you can reallocate those assets elsewhere to fill in the other gaps. So that's ultimately what it comes down to. Not as much against LeVert personally. It's just a matter of where the Cavs are at and what they need.
Yeah, consolidation seems to be the name of the game when it comes to some of these guys. And I lied. I do have one more question for you to be short and sweet. George Niang, we know he's very chummy with Donovan Mitchell, harkening back to their Utah days. He had, I'll just categorize it as a poor season last year. And a lot of people would probably put that way worse. But what is the, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you how much confidence do you have in him having a bounce back season in 2024-25?
It's a coin flip.
Okay, a 5. I'll take that as a 5. Okay.
So I categorize as a few different things. One, I think they put a lot of pressure on Niang and Wade to be that third big, and really they shouldn't be that third big.
Mm-hmm.
So because of the lack of investment elsewhere with the bigs, it ultimately fell on them, probably in putting them in positions they shouldn't have. So once Wade went out, he really required Niang to kind of rebound, defend, shoot, and really he's not good at all those things combined. Really, it's just focusing on shooting and providing some hustle plays. So I think hopefully if they can scale back what they're asking Niang to do, really limit his minutes more, maybe 15, 18 minutes a game, and really try to build out a better bench cast to support him, really cover up. So one of the issues they had with Niang running the second unit was rebounding really fell off.
Yes.
Because he's just not a good rebounder. And trying to supplement, maybe put some other good rebounders with him in the second unit and not have some of those weaknesses be so apparent. So I'm hoping for a revitalized, slimmed down, Niang. And that's always the thing that we've seen in Cleveland too, is when you're bringing in a guy who just shoots, if he doesn't shoot, which is sometimes a confidence-related game when you're bringing in someone from outside, trying to load the expectations of the contract, trying to acclimate to a new climate, trying to, impress the new fan base, that can really weigh on your confidence. And when you're not doing other things outside of shooting to contribute, it just drags you down even further. So I think it was just kind of a snowball effect with Niang. So hopefully if you can get out to a good start, kind of do some other things that can provide value. Because we saw in Philadelphia, some of the on-off splits with Embiid, with Maxey, he was a really positive player. So it's not like it's outside of his scope of ability to be a positive influence. It just, with everything that happened with last year with injuries, with Wade going down, it really just put him in the spotlight when maybe he's more of a supporting role, a backup dancer, as opposed to being one of the, co-lead singers off the bench.
Yeah, 22.3 minutes per game last season is probably too much for Niang on a team with title aspirations. I think 15 to 18 is a solid range for him. He is coming off a season, on paper at least, that says, if you're just looking at the surface level stats, 37.6% from 3-point range out of your front court isn't terrible. But when you look at that 3.4 rebounding, total rebounding, and that 8.5% total rebound percentage, and it just does not vibe well with me. I don't like that the rebounding that you're sacrificing by not having a true big out there. And I think you did kind of force, as you said, Wade and Niang into these positions into which they're playing and taking on roles that they just generally are not good at, or just have not had to for a substantial amount of time. And it worked to the detriment of them. I think losing that weight and getting in the shape that he was in Philadelphia, because we've seen some of the videos, we've seen some of the tweets and things like that indicating that he is in the best shape that he has been in since he's come to Cleveland. I think that will definitely help. I think increasing the pace could definitely help his effectiveness. But at the end of the day, we're just going to kind of have to wait and see with him. I'm hoping for a bigger season from him, because when he was signed, I was hyped, man. I thought that was going to end up being a signing that was really going to pay dividends. And I still think it can, but it has to be subsidized. It kind of has to be, the role has to be held into a certain light, in my opinion. And I think the first step here is adjusting those minutes, not having to rely on him so much. And I think a huge part of that is literally just going to be some of these guys staying healthy. But time will tell. Thanks for coming on, man. Go ahead.
I would say, can I change my answer from before after hearing you say that?
Sure.
I'd say I put third big as the biggest need.
I don't think you're wrong at all. It's just I woke up this morning, as of recording this, by the way, it's September 9th, but I woke up this morning and I saw Robert Williams trades on my timeline. And I'm like, guys, I'm not even going to voice my opinion on that one. It just tells you the state. It just tells you the current state of the big situation right now.
Yeah, and just looking at playoff-wise, when you start building on a top 8 or top 9 rotation, that's the other thing with Kenny. He's been known consistently to play 10-plus guys. Whether or not that'll carry over into the postseason, we'll see. So hopefully should reduce Niang's minutes. When we get realistically down into the playoffs, you're talking about 8, maybe 9 guys. Mm-hmm. There's really no other bigs on the Cavs roster who can fit with Mobley and Allen. So really it's either Wade or Niang. And that is just a scary proposition to, again, go into the postseason relying on one of those two to soak up all of the third big minutes which, if you're counting for, low to mid 30s for Mobley and Allen, it's still a 20 plus per minute game guy. And that is just scary. There's enough, I think, wings that they have, whether it be Travers or Tyson or Levert or Okoro if he comes back, or Wade masquerading as a wing, which, can work. I think there's enough guys to potentially get away with, knowing that Mitchell and Garland will soak up minutes, that there's only so much left over. But just seeing that big hole up front is scary.
Yeah, and just to close out here, I think it is worth noting, and I think this JT Thor signing is going to end up being an underrated move. He played 83% of his minutes last year with Charlotte at power forward, and he actually managed to play 8% of his minutes at center. If they can really get something out of him the way that they have not been able to with some of their two-way talents, like Isaiah Mobley in particular, if they can get a big off of that two-way, and I know we were both kind of hoping that that Diop could have been that guy, but obviously that has not been the case. If they can luck into getting one of these cost controlled options off the bench, or on a two-way salary contract rather, if they can get one of these guys to really jump into a role, that would definitely help that backup big situation. But time will tell. Again, thanks for coming on. Such short notice, man.
No, I appreciate having me, and you do great work as well, and always clued into what you're saying and trying to calm the masses. I think you're better at it than most, so appreciate the work you do.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Likewise. As I always tell you guys, if you'd like to reach out, you know how you can. It's Cavalier_pod on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and more. If you want to be added to the It's Cavalier Discord chat, you know what to do. Leave a rating, leave a review, send a screenshot of said review to itscavalier53@gmail.com. If you want to support the podcast in a small but helpful way, consider becoming a member over on Patreon. The link will be in the description of this video. Again, thanks again, Real Cavs fans. Go Cavs.